I'm Marella Fernandez. Welcome to Market Call. Colin Stewart on the show today, CEO, Portfolio Manager at J.C. Clark. He'll be taking your questions on North American equities. Here is how to reach us. 1-855-326-6266 if you're calling in. You can also send us an email, marketcall@bnnbloomberg.ca. Colin, thanks for coming in.
Good to be here, Marella.
Let's talk a little bit about valuations to start, because I know you have been saying they're at extreme levels. When was the last time we saw something like this?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what market we look at. Obviously, the Canadian market valuations are a little bit lower. The reasons for that is, as everyone knows, weaker economy here. But across the border in the U.S., I mean, the valuations are really at almost two-decade level highs. I mean, we're going back to 1999, 2000 to really see the types of elevated valuations. Obviously, some of that is driven by the tech sector, which has seen really strong results. But part of that is if we just even look broadly at the S&P 500, the multiple now on a forward basis is about 22 or 23 times, which is, as I said, we really haven't seen these valuation levels almost going back to 99, 2000. So it's been a long time. And, you know, that combined with all of the uncertainty, the tariff risk, I'd say the general unpredictability of the Trump administration, just give us reason for pause, at least as it relates to the U.S. market. We're not calling for some huge correction necessarily, just saying I think it makes sense for investors to be a little more careful where they're allocating capital, look for perhaps value type names that are trading at lower multiples, companies with predictable cash flow, and we tend to right now favor the Canadian market, which people are quite down on, a lot of pessimism around Canada, and we sort of think we might be at the sort of the maximum point of pessimism as it relates to Canada and the Canadian market.
I was going to say, do you put your money in the Canadian market because that tariff threat is looming over us large? Donald Trump, even in the last 24 hours, of course, saying, okay, now it's going to be pharmaceuticals, now it's going to be microchips, now it's going to be vehicles, which you mentioned last week. I mean, where do investors in the 6 months to a year from now look for that stability?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things. I think, number one, valuations are already low in the Canadian market or Canadian equities. So some of that, I think a lot of that pessimism is reflected in the prices you're paying. Number two, I think we're, obviously somewhat likely to get a change in government or potentially, or at least a new leader for the country. I think some of the things that's happening south of the border with deregulation and tax cuts are likely going to force Canada into somewhat more business-friendly policies. So perhaps we're going to see a little bit more business-friendly administration here at some point, and that could help businesses. And I think investors really need to analyze each company and each sector on a company-by-company level. I mean, there are some businesses that are purely domestic. They shouldn't be impacted by tariffs. Obviously, businesses like the auto parts sector, anything to do with the automotive, or companies that manufacture here and ship goods across the border.
A lot of risk.
Yeah, potentially very exposed. But then there are other companies that, we own many businesses that have a lot of revenue in the U.S., but they also have people, facilities, factories, and actual infrastructure in the U.S., and they're not necessarily exporting goods from Canada. So I think, again, those types of companies are less vulnerable to the tariff risk.
All right. So we will be taking questions. And one thing I do want to ask you a little later in the show, because I'm sure we're going to get callers in on this, is whether to jump into the tech stocks in the U.S., considering the valuations there. But we'll get to that in a moment. Colin, of course, is joining us here on the show to take your questions. Colin Stewart, CEO, Portfolio Manager at J.C. Clark, answering your questions on North American equities. Here's how to get hold